else, we are relying on ourselves to figure it out. Now, admittedly, probably for you all, just like for me, this requires some real adjustments in our thinking. It requires a retraining of our thinking in how we look at God. Jeremiah 29:13 said, "And you will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart." Next week we're going to be looking at Deuteronomy chapter 6, where it says, "Love the Lord with all your heart." Love God with all your heart. Jeremiah 33:3, a verse that I memorized when I was a kid and have held on to it. "Call unto me, and I'll answer you, and I'll show you great and mighty things that you know nothing of." The Hebrew of that great and mighty things literally means, I will reveal the secret things of my heart to you. I will expose myself to you. Now let me tell you something. We cannot be in that place in life if we are not in a place of worship and loving desire and adoration for God. And we can't be there if we're looking for God to fix things in our life. Now let me say to you once again, there's nothing wrong with going to God with our concerns and our desires and issues in our life. There's nothing wrong with that. The Bible talks about taking these things to God. The Bible talks about letting our burdens go to God, casting all your cares on Him. But it's in the context of our love for Him. Otherwise, as I said earlier, we're treating God like the car dealership where we go to get our car serviced. We look to get it serviced, we look to get the problems fixed, we get in a vehicle and we drive off and we don't return to the next problem. Ask yourself this question: how often do you spend time before the Lord worshiping Him and not asking Him for one thing? How often does that happen? Man, I'm embarrassed to say it doesn't happen often enough for me. Last thing I'd like for you to write down is this: when we seek out God, we should seek Him out for who He is. We should seek God out for who He is. Creator of all. Creator of heaven and earth. Our desire should be for a heart to know God and of reverence for Him, for who He is, and to have that grace of His to live daily in us, obedient to His way of life. That's what our hearts should be. Our hearts should be so motivated by our love for God that our desires should be to live in obedience to His Word. We can't live in obedience to God's Word and be busy trying to rationalize out why God hasn't fixed things as quickly as we'd like for them to be fixed. We cannot live in obedience to God and be so focused on God's timing. How can we be obedient to God when we're trying to convince God to hurry up? Hurry up, God. Hurry up. It's getting closer. I need to pay this bill. It's getting closer. It's getting closer. Hurry up, God. Hurry up. God, I'm getting weaker and weaker. I'm getting sicker and sicker. I believe it was Andrew Murray. Again, one of my, and no disrespect when I say this, one of the dead guys that I like to read. I can remember reading about him as his first wife was dying. And I don't remember what the illness was, but as she was struggling and dying, his testimony was this. He talked to God and said, "Your will be done." And that was it. He was okay with God not healing her because of his love for God. Jesus in John 17 made it very clear and wrote that your will be done. He said, I have lived to glorify you. You be glorified as a result of my obedience. Been preparing for the community service here and just planning things and getting things together. And of course it's on Palm Sunday. And, you know, we so often associate Palm Sunday with Jesus and riding a donkey. And you've seen these pictures, these Sunday school pictures of Jesus coming through this arched gate in Jerusalem. And he's on this donkey. And just rows of people dropping palm fronds down in front of him, and this great procession. All this excitement, enthusiasm. And the real message is lost of the victory of Jesus' death in the cross. He was obedient to his death. And that is the one thing that should be remembered, yet the one thing that is never mentioned. That his obedience was to die on the cross for you and for me. Psalm 119:2 says, Blessed are those who keep his testimony, who seek him with a whole heart. I'm running out of time. I wish I had, quite honestly, another hour. Don't forget where Romans 8:28 is, because we will be back there again next week. Gentlemen, if you all want to come up and help me with communion. One of the things that, of course, we do this once a month. I'm almost at a point that I just as soon do it every Sunday. Quite honestly, my concern is that it become rote or become habit, and the meaning is lost to it. Is that we want to, Jesus said, this do in remembrance of me. Gentlemen, if you all want to go ahead and take the elements and pass them out. We have the pre-packaged ones as well, if you so desire those. If you all go ahead and pass those out and get those taken care of. I want to challenge you today as we're passing out these elements, and Jesus said, this do in remembrance of me. I want to challenge you to simply remember God's love. And as you remember God's love, ask yourself, how much are you really loving him? how much are you really loving God at this point? Are you loving God to the place that you are willing to let go of your focus on things being fixed? Now, I realize that's a lot to ask for. I understand that that is a whole lot to ask for. How can we, in all our humanity, by any scope of reasoning, stop asking God to fix things? I've thought about that. I thought about it from a practical standpoint of when my wife, some 20 years ago, was diagnosed with an illness that there is no cure for. Knowing that we would have to undergo changes in our lifestyle, that we would no longer be able to backpack and cave. Of course, Robin wasn't big on the caving, but she would go with me. That we would no longer be climbing and rappelling. Never could get her to rappel upside down, but the boys did. But you see, in the beginning, I kept saying, God heal her, God heal her. Lord, won't you heal her? And then I transitioned from that to, okay, God, do a work in me. Do a work in me to love her and care for her. Do a work in me to fix her, to take care of her, to be there with her. Now, I'm still a long way on that. God's still working on me with that one. As a 5-year-old once said when he was asked about what God was doing with him, and his response was, He's just getting started with me. But what I've come to an understanding is, as we grow to a place of focusing on our love and worship for God, and that alone, everything else is dimmed in comparison. See, I can say that with confidence because Paul went to God when he was struggling. And Paul went to God 3 times and asked God to fix him in his illness. Asked God to heal him from the things that he was struggling with. 3 times. Becky, Gary, you want to go sit down? 3 times. And it was interesting. God answered him. Remember God's promise, the one I just shared with you from Jeremiah 33:3. Call unto me and I will answer you. See, God never said that He wouldn't answer. He never said that at all. Never responded and said He wouldn't answer. He always said He'd answer. But His answer was what? What is it, 2 Corinthians 12:9? My grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in your weakness. Now, I don't know about you, but I've learned I want God's strength. I don't want mine. I'll fail my wife every time in my own strength. I will fail my kids every time in my own strength. My strength is sufficient for you. See, that's my reason for just focusing on loving God. Because I know when I am loving God, His strength, His grace, remember, all things work together for good to them that love God. All things work together for good. But you see, it's all about loving God. As we take these, the whole principle of this that was done at the Passover meal, at the end of the meal, was Jesus broke the bread, and each one of the disciples took it. And I can't help but approach this without Jesus saying, "This is my body that's broken for you." And the first thing that comes to mind is John 14:1. Jesus is telling the disciples that he was going to die. And he sensed that they were greatly disturbed. And it's interesting, even then, the revelation of God's heart through his Son for us. Because you would think the disciples would have been stepping up and encouraging Jesus, but instead it was just the opposite. Jesus was encouraging the disciples. His response in John 14:1 was, "Don't let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, now believe also in me." Jesus said, "This is my body that was broken for you." Jesus endured it all for us so that we could be safe in simply loving God and not have to worry about God fixing. Because you see this, and I hate to say it this way, but I'm going to say it this way. When Jesus died on the cross, it was all fixed. Everything was already fixed. "This is my body that's broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me." So join me in taking it. And then if that wasn't enough, we have this magnificent cup. Now please do not look at this plastic container with this little bit of grape juice in it, but look at what it represents. Jesus told the disciples, he said, "This is my blood that's shed for you." Not one drop did he spare. He called this the better covenant, the new covenant, the guarantee. This is the guarantee that when Jesus said in Matthew 6:32 that my Father already knows what your needs are. And then in verse 33 he said, "Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and after that all these other things will be added." This is why he could say that with confidence. When Paul wrote 2 Corinthians 12:9, "My grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in your weakness." What God told him, this is the reason. When Paul wrote in Philippians 4:19, "My God shall supply all your needs according to his riches and glory," this is the reason. Philippians 4:13, "I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me." This is the reason. The better covenant, the guarantee, the seal. And Jesus said, "This do in remembrance of me." So join me in drinking. Susie, if you'll come up and play a verse of the last song that we have. I don't want to sing it. I just want Susie to play it. And I want us to just sit here quietly for a minute and remember and think about the fact, how much am I really loving God? Or how much am I looking for God to fix things in my life? And let me promise you this. the more love we focus on towards God, the less everything else matters. Susie?